Welcome to the deep dive. History often have these hidden stories, really powerful narratives of struggle, of survival that can kind of challenge how we see the past and, well, how it shapes us right now. Today, we're doing one of those deep dives into a critical topic, one that's often been silenced. We've pulled together insights from some fascinating articles, historical accounts, and especially from a really profound book called They Tried to Break Us, Buck Breaking and the War on Black and Caribbean Men by Frank Rodriguez. So, our mission here is to really unearth the frankly harrowing reality of something called buck breaking, this ritualized violence used against Black and Caribbean men during slavery. And we want to follow how that evolved, how it mutated through history. It's not just about the pain, though. It's also about incredible resilience, the active ways people resisted, ways that, continue today.
Exactly. And what we'll see is how this ancient form of oppression didn't just vanish. It evolves, weaving itself right into societal structures. But here's the key thing. I think communities have always found these amazing ways to sort of encode their memories, their resistance,
Yeah.
turning intense trauma into, believe it or not, a source of power.
Ah.
So yeah, we'll look at the systematic violence for sure, but also those powerful acts of taking back control, of reclamation.
That's a great frame. Understanding the violence to see the reclamation. Okay, so to really get into this, we have to start with the toughest part. Let's unpack this term. What exactly is buck breaking?
Well, the term itself, buck breaking, it's relatively modern, but it's used as a symbolic name, really, for a very old ritual of domination, utter domination. Buck itself was a colonial slur, right? Used to animalize, to dehumanize strong Black men, especially, those who showed any defiance. And breaking, well, that points to the deliberate process of destroying that defiance, crushing their refusal to submit. It's a deeply unsettling name for some truly horrific practices.
So, more than just a word, it describes a whole system, a deliberate process. What did that look like historically? What does the term actually represent in terms of actions?
It represents strategic violence. The source is clear on this, so it wasn't random. We're talking about things like public rape, forced breeding, castration, intense psychological warfare.
Yeah.
And this was deployed systematically on plantations right across the Caribbean, Jamaica, Haiti, Puerto Rico, Trinidad, Barbados, Cuba, Dominica, Grenada, St. Kitts. The list goes on. An enslaved man wasn't just, punished privately. Often he was made into a public spectacle. His body, his pain become a warning, a forced performance meant to break the will of others, humiliate the individual, and really try to sever their connection to their heritage, their spiritual strength.
That's incredibly disturbing, that strategic element. You mentioned it targeted ancestral fire. What did that actually mean for the people going through it, beyond the physical? How deep do those wounds go?
Yeah, ancestral fire. It wasn't just about controlling the body. It was a profound psychological and spiritual attack. By targeting that fire, they were aiming to cut the connection to lineage, to history, to the soul, really, to the memory passed down. It was engineered, designed to make men fear their own strength, their own power, and to make entire communities terrified of rebellion. It aimed to erase that spiritual blueprint, for self-determination. And those wounds, they're incredibly deep, incredibly enduring because they attack identity itself, belonging, spiritual power. It creates this silence that can just echo down through generations.
Frank Rodriguez puts it so powerfully in his book. He says, buck breaking is not just physical, it is spiritual. It targets the soul, the lineage, the archive. And then he makes this declaration. It's really striking. We were not broken, we were marked, and now we mark back. That concept of the archive, that deep memory, the blueprint seems so central.
That's exactly right. For Rodriguez, the archive isn't just like old documents in a library. It's the living memory, the spiritual core, the blueprint of identity and culture that was directly under assault. So when he says, we were not broken, we were marked, and now we mark back, it's this incredibly powerful assertion of active resistance. It's about reclaiming that spiritual archive, refusing to be defined by the attack.
It's a chilling statement, and it makes you think, what was the deeper empire logic, as you called it, behind this level of brutality? What does it tell us about the mindset that would institutionalize this?
Well, this empire logic, it wasn't just about getting labor, extracting work. It was a meticulously designed system for total containment. The enslaved body wasn't just property. It was mapped out, categorized, and ritually violated to achieve that containment. The plantation itself was almost a stage, and sexual violence was a key part of the script. Rape, for instance, was strategically used to destroy family lines, to sever that ancestral fire. We talked about cutting people off from heritage, spiritual strength, and to make rebellion seem unthinkable. And they specifically targeted men because they symbolized protection, defiance, continuity, refusal. Empire saw that and needed it shattered.
That idea of the plantation as a stage, chilling. And it wasn't just implied, right? You mentioned colonial laws actually legalized this, like
Yeah.
Barbados, Jamaica, Saint Domingue.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Those laws explicitly legalized and normalized sexual violence and public humiliation. They essentially gave overseers total authority to discipline enslaved men in these ways.
How does that legal backing change things, make it worse?
It institutionalizes terror. When the state itself sanctions these atrocities, it sends a horrifying message. This violence is okay, it's legitimate, and you, the enslaved person, have absolutely no recourse, no protection under the law. This legally enforced silence then buried the trauma under shame, under fear. It prevented it from being transmitted openly as a story of injustice. Instead, it festered, becoming this internalized wound. It was a total siege, legal, psychological.
So did this look the same everywhere, or were there variations in how this empire logic played out across different parts of the Caribbean?
That's a great question. And yes, Rodriguez talks about this concept he calls Caribbean containment corridors. Think of each island, each colony, as almost a separate grim laboratory, a laboratory of domination. The specific methods of violence might change, they might mutate, but the fundamental goal, suppressing masculine presence and resistance, stayed constant across these different locations.
Like different experiments all trying to achieve the same result.
Yeah.
Control.
Exactly. So, for example, in Jamaica, you saw a lot of public punishment, rape, castration, used for psychological collapse. And the Maroons, those who escaped slavery and formed their own communities, they carried this trauma, but also resistance, often in silence, encoded in their community structures and secrecy.
Right.
Then in Haiti, under French rule, they specifically targeted Vodou priests, masculine community leaders with sexual violence. But then the Haitian Revolution in 1791 became this incredible act of spiritual counter-warfare, a massive refusal. In Puerto Rico, the Spanish colonizers used forced breeding programs, essentially trying to reduce men to just genetic tools while also suppressing spiritual practices like espiritismo.
And Trinidad.
In Trinidad, under the British, the focus was more on fragmentation, separating men from families, trying to replace indigenous spiritual systems with colonial religion. But even there, African traditions survived, hidden in plain sight within things like carnival, in drumming, encoded rituals that the empire couldn't fully understand or stamp out. These were all engineered environments, basically, designed to push the limits of oppression, always watching for rebellion. And in every case, masculinity itself was deliberately marked as dangerous, as disposable.
And this is such a critical pivot point in the story, understanding that this systematic violence, it didn't just stop when emancipation happened. It, as you said, mutated. Frank Rodriguez has that line, the whip became the law, the overseer became the judge, the plantation became the prison. It's like the ritual just found a new stage. Let's look at some of those transformations. How did the law itself become the new whip?
Precisely. That shift from whip to law was stark. After emancipation, you get things like Jim Crow laws, vagrancy laws, deliberately biased anti-black policing, all designed to criminalize black male presence itself. Just being there became suspect. And as Michelle Alexander outlined so clearly in the new Jim Crow, this directly followed the rise of the prison system as the new containment corridor, a modern version of the plantation in many ways.
So the containment became legal, institutional, but it wasn't just physical or legal, right? It attacked the very image of black men, too.
Oh, absolutely. This media distortion was and still is incredibly powerful. Think about Hollywood portrayals, news coverage, even colonial education systems. They relentlessly painted Black and Caribbean men as either violent predators, hypersexual, or just completely absent fathers. It was a systematic campaign to rewrite the image of masculinity, as scholars like Mark Anthony Neal have explored. It created these stereotypes that were incredibly damaging and persistent.
And then there's the aspect you mentioned earlier, which is deeply disturbing, medical warfare. How did medicine become a tool in this?
Yeah, this is where buck-breaking mutated into medical pathologization. We saw horrific practices like forced sterilizations, which were particularly widespread in places like Puerto Rico, plus psychiatric abuse, experimental treatments. Basically, black masculinity itself was framed as inherently unstable, pathological. Any resistance, any refusal was labeled as aggression, a mental defect. Harriet A. Washington's work, Medical Apartheid, documents this history meticulously. The body became a medicalized battlefield.
So the attacks spread legal, media, medical, and spiritual too. Did that continue after slavery?
Yes, the spiritual suppression absolutely continued. Indigenous spiritual systems, Vodou, Santeria, Espiritismo remained targets. Male spiritual leaders were often punished, their practices driven underground, erased, or deliberately distorted. Robert Ferris Thompson's work, like Flash of the Spirit, really highlights how these traditions became coded forms of resistance, holding on to memory and power despite the pressure. The aim was always to sever that spiritual connection, but these systems proved incredibly resilient.
And within families. How did all this impact fathers and sons, the transmission across generations?
It led to what Rodriguez calls generational silence. Fathers, carrying the weight of this trauma, this assault on their very being, often couldn't speak about it. There was no language given to them for it, only shame. So they passed down the trauma, the pain, but often without the words to understand it. Sons inherited the shame, the rage, the confusion without context. Masculinity itself became this sort of unexamined wound passed down silently.
And this didn't just start when boys became men, did it? The targeting started much earlier.
Much earlier, this became a war on youth under siege. Think about disproportionate school discipline, the school-to-prison pipeline, juvenile detention rates, those same media portrayals marking Caribbean boys, black boys, as threats almost from birth, certainly before puberty. Thinkers like Paulo Freire and Pedagogy of the Oppressed show how education systems themselves can be designed to stifle potential, to teach conformity, perpetuating that containment logic right from childhood.
It's just a relentless continuum. Rodriguez sums it up so chillingly. Empire never stopped the ritual. It simply changed the stage. It really forces you to reconsider labels. These men weren't inherently unstable or criminals or pathologically aggressive or heretics or threats. As Rodriguez puts it, we were encoded. And now we decode the diagnosis, mutation, or ritual suppression siege, decoding the attack. And this is the crucial turn in the archive. That deep memory, it never forgot. Even when the term buck-breaking vanished from official histories, the memory lived. You could find it in stories elders whispered, in the defiant rhythms of music. So the big question becomes, how did masculinity, facing this relentless, multi-generational assault, begin to reforge itself? How did communities start to rebuild?
Right, and this is where the resistance becomes so visible, so powerful. We see the emergence of what Rodriguez calls codex fatherhood. This isn't just about biology, it's deeply spiritual. Fathers stepped up, becoming like griots, storytellers, keepers of memory. They became protectors, altar keepers in a sense. They consciously transmitted rhythm, the spirit of refusal across generations. They were actively rebuilding that masculine grid, that spiritual framework, marking it not with domination, but with ritual protection, lineage, resilience.
I love that idea, codex fatherhood, and the concept of reclamation of the masculine body, refusing shame, seeing the body as an archive. What does that actually involve?
It's a profound act of defiance, really. It means actively refusing the shame that empire tried to impose. It means marking pleasure, touch, embodiment as sacred again, not as something dangerous or dirty. It's about understanding your own body as both an archive holding the memory of trauma, yes, but also resilience, and as an altar, a sacred space for healing and future potential. It involved consciously restoring touch, rhythm, and what Rodriguez terms fire, that vital life force, that spiritual energy back to their rightful place, refusing the distorted script.
So it's much more than just individual therapy, isn't it? It's a collective cultural reclaiming.
Well, absolutely. This concept of ritual memory in the masculine archive underlines that. Memory isn't just in dusty books. It's encrypted in the blood, in the breath, in the very act of refusal. It survived through drum beats, through coded gestures in dance or ritual, through the body itself becoming a living temple, holding that knowledge. Masculinity, in this view, isn't just history. It's a living codex, an active, ongoing resistance. As Rodriguez says, just so powerfully, we were not forgotten, we were encoded, and now we mark the archive with fire, activating that stored memory.
Which leads us perfectly to his idea of sovereign masculinity. He calls it the ultimate rebuttal protocol. Help us understand that. What kind of masculinity is this, if it's a rebuttal?
Yeah, sovereign masculinity. It's crucial to understand it's not about performing domination, not about that toxic hypermasculinity often portrayed. Instead, it's a powerful, active protocol, a strategy for protection, for refusal, and for rebuilding. It's a masculinity rooted in self-ownership, self-knowledge, deep connection to lineage, and responsibility to the community. Calling it a rebuttal protocol emphasizes that it's a conscious, systematic response, a counter-strategy designed to counteract empire's attempts to fragment and control.
Okay, so it's an active strategy. And Rodriguez actually outlines specific protocols for it, these codex protocols. Can you break those down?
He does, yes. He outlines 3 core protocols. First is protection. This means actively defending the youth from what he calls empire's siege. It means marking their fire, their potential early on, refusing external diagnoses that try to pathologize them, activating their rhythm, their connection to culture.
Okay, protection first.
Second is refusal. This is about consciously rejecting the distortions, the stereotypes empire created, refusing the shame, explicitly naming the rituals of attack, like butt breaking, and marking that attack itself as an act of resistance, saying, we see you and we refuse this.
Naming it is key.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And third is rebuilding. This involves reconstructing fatherhood in that broader spiritual sense we talked about, reclaiming the body as sacred space, reactivating ancestral rituals and practices, encrypting memory in new, resilient ways through art, music, storytelling, and consciously, deliberately threading the lineage forward, ensuring continuity. And he ties it all together with this statement. Masculinity is not pathology. It is codex logic under siege. And now we mark the grid, reclaiming the framework, the logic itself.
Wow. What an incredibly powerful journey this deep dive has been. From confronting the brutal reality of buckbreaking and seeing how systemic it was, then tracing its really insidious mutations through law, media, medicine, spiritual suppression, all the way to this profound story of encoded resistance, of memory kept alive, and the active, conscious rebuilding of a sovereign masculinity.
And I think understanding this history, naming it like Frank Rodriguez does in his work, it's not just about looking back at past trauma. It's actually about activating resilience now. It's about reclaiming identity and maybe most importantly, building what he calls a firewall against collapse in the present. It's a living codex, a blueprint for survival, for empowerment today.
So as we wrap up, something for you, our listener, to maybe reflect on. What really stands out to you from this deep dive, and how might understanding this incredibly profound history, this story of both attack and encoded resistance, how might that shift your own perspective on resilience, on identity, and maybe on the sheer power of memory in your own life, in your own community?